Imagine standing inside Westminster Abbey on Christmas Day, 1066. The air is thick with smoke, shouts echo in English and French, and outside, Norman soldiers panic and set fire to nearby houses. Inside, trembling at the altar, stands a man who has just seized a kingdom, William, Duke of Normandy, now King of England. This is the dramatic beginning of the Norman Conquest, one of the most important turning points in English history. William had won a stunning victory at the Battle of Hastings, where Harold Godwinson, the last Anglo-Saxon king, fell in battle. London and Winchester had surrendered, yet despite all this, William's crown was not secure. In fact, his position was incredibly fragile. For the next 5 years, from 1067 to 1070, rebellion flared almost every single year. In Kent, in the southwest, in the Welsh marches, in the Fenlands, and most ferociously in the north of England, resistance to Norman rule erupted again and again. The Normans, far from being a comfortable ruling elite, had to live as though they were an occupying army, eating, sleeping, and fighting together. Their answer to constant rebellion was the castle. Castles were not just defensive structures, they were tools of domination. A single Norman castle could control and terrorize the local population. Think about the numbers. There may have been no more than 10,000 Normans living among 1 or 2 million Anglo Saxons. That's one Norman for every 200 English people. It was a classic case of a small conquering elite ruling a resentful majority. Now, it's important to note that not every Englishman resisted. Many cooperated, and this is part of why the Norman takeover succeeded. They were able to use Anglo-Saxon institutions, the legal systems, the treasury, the church structures to their own advantage. But make no mistake, resentment was deep. For the English, the conquest was catastrophic. They had not only lost their king, they were losing their entire way of life. One chronicler later described them as an oppressed majority in their own country. Almost certainly, William had not intended such a sweeping revolution at first. In the early years, many English lords were allowed to keep their lands, provided they submitted. But by 1086, just 20 years after Hastings, everything had changed. The evidence is written in one of the most famous books in English history, the Domesday Book. This was a vast survey of land and wealth ordered by William. What is revealed was shocking. The old Anglo-Saxon aristocracy was virtually gone. By 1086, there were only four surviving English lords of any importance. More than 4,000 Thames Anglo-Saxon landowners had lost their estates. In their palace stood fewer than 200 Norman barons. The church, too, was transformed. In 1070, William began removing English bishops and abbots, replacing them with Normans. From then on, no Englishman was appointed to high office in the church. And then there was the brutality. Perhaps the darkest moment came in the winter of 1067, when William carried out the infamous harrying of the north. After rebellions in Yorkshire, his armies laid waste to the land. Villages were burned, crops destroyed, and livestock slaughtered. So complete was the devastation that even years later much of the land lay empty and uncultivated. In some areas, land values dropped by two-thirds. The result of all this was nothing less than the birth of a new England. The Anglo-Saxon ruling class was replaced by a Norman one. The language of power shifted from Old English to Norman French. Law, culture, and even the design of churches and castles now reflected the continent, not the island's own traditions. And perhaps most significantly, England itself became part of a wider European political structure, because William and his barons still held their lands in Normandy. England and Normandy were tied together as a single cross-channel community. The Channel, in effect, was not a barrier but a bridge. For the next 150 years, English politics would be inseparable from French politics. So, when we look back at that smoky Christmas day in 1066, when William trembled before the altar, we are not just witnessing a coronation, we are seeing the birth of a new order. The Norman conquest did not simply replace one king with another, it replaced an entire culture, an entire ruling class, and set England on a course which would shape its destiny for centuries. It's been said that no other conquest in European history was as disastrous for the defeated as the Norman conquest was for the English. And yet, from that disaster emerged a new kingdom, one that would soon become one of the most powerful in Europe. So, if you found the story of 1066 and the Norman conquest fascinating, imagine how many more turning points lie hidden in medieval history. Let me know in the comments what you think about the Norman conquest. Is it ultimately a tragedy for England or the start of something greater?